Picking up from the previous video, we are still messing with the sheep, but now we are going to use the clone stamp tool. So the clone stamp is here in the toolbar, and you can just press S as well to select it. This is also like a brush, so you can increase, decrease the brush size with the square brackets. And by default, you should have the aligned option turned on. And also make sure you set the sampling options to all layers. In case you are using a pen tablet, you can also turn on pressure sensitivity to be able to change the brush size dynamically. And another important option that you should make sure you set up in the beginning is the hardness of the brush. It should be 0% or very low, because you want the clone stamp to be able to work with a feathered edge. I'm just going to make sure I'm on the retouch layer, the same layer that we used in the previous video. You can see I can turn it off, and then we can see the original image or turn it back on. So we managed to remove the fence in the background, apart from some detail around the tree. So let me just zoom onto that and show you how the clone stamp tool can help us in these cases. So while the healing brushes will always try to blend into their environment, they always force blending themselves, the clone stamp tool just simply copy and pastes details. So if I alt click maybe somewhere here, hover over, I can already see whether this would be a good replacement, and if I like it, all I need to do is to paint over. And nothing unexpected will happen, because this simply just pastes whatever you selected. Once again, if I do the same thing here on the other side, alt click and then start painting over, you see nothing unexpected happens again, simply paints over whatever I highlighted earlier. So whatever you selected, it just simply copy and paste those details over. So it worked much better around the tree, which had a very different color compared to the grass in the image. So that's a rule that you will need to remember, that healing brushes most of the time will create smudge details around high contrast edges, while the clone stamp tool can perfectly go even close to the edges as long as you use the right sized brush. And of course, you sample from the right places, because sampling is key. Where you are sampling from and how you align that with the clone stamp is really what you have to practice. So let's do a little bit of test here. Let's say I want to swap the sheep around, and I want this little sheep here to be on the right side and the other one to be on the left side. That way they will be perfectly in sync with the parents. In this case, what I would use as a sample point is somewhere around here, because this is where I'm going to place the legs. So I can decide exactly where that's going to be. And by increasing the brush size with the bracket keys, I can see a little bit more already of my sampling. I don't want to make it too big, because then it will just start painting over too much detail. So let's say I want to sheep somewhere here. I start painting, and thanks to the aligned option, remember I selected this at the beginning, I don't have to paint with one brush stroke. You can see I left it off around there, but I can always go back and continue paint over it. When I get closer to the top, I am going to be a bit more careful. So I don't want to paint over the other sheep, just this one. And there's a perfect clone of the sheep. Now, if I want to remove the original one, I could sample from another detail here, an empty detail. And let me zoom a little bit closer so we can see exactly what's going to happen. Once I align that, I can start painting over it. And just the way we managed to copy it to the other side, I can also remove it from this side. This is the only part where I have to be a little bit careful not to remove too much detail from that sheep there. And while we are here, we can also remove this bit here. Now, another thing is that if you sample from a detail further in the background, which is more out of focus, it won't look as good here in this part. So whenever you have a certain depth of field, make sure you always select a detail from the same distance. So to replace this one here, I would sample from somewhere here and then retouch it sideways. That way the focus will match the environment and it will look much less fake. So it looks so far quite good. So we moved the sheep from left to right. Now let's do the same thing with this little fella here. So I'm just going to make again a sampling point, Alt click, and then we are going to go here and start painting. Once again, cloning sheep, as you do. So once we are ready, we can slightly adjust these details here just to make sure the grass is leveled. I'm going to sample from the grass, paint over that little detail there. I just felt like it was a little bit visible or too obvious that that detail has been retouched there. But now I think it fits in quite well. So before and after. And then what we are going to do is to remove the sheep from here. So I'm going to again sample from a nearby detail, but try not to sample too close whenever you want to remove something. So if you sample too close to the detail you are removing and you start painting over, you are actually just pushing details away. So you are pushing it to the side. So instead of sampling too close, sample a bit further away. So allow yourself enough space for the replacement. And once again, I am going to align the grass to the image and then start painting. I first go up and then work my way to the left. You can also always let go the brush because it's aligned. We can do it in a couple of steps, so you don't have to do it all in one. Try to be patient with this tool. So you can see I'm not rushing anything. I'm carefully selecting where I want to clone from. So carefully selecting my sampling and also always align my brush before I start painting over details. So now we can see before and after. And I think it looks already so much better. So again, before and after. But the main thing here is to understand the difference between the clone stamp and the healing brushes. But to practice a bit more with the clone stamp tool, let me switch to another image where we have a beautiful scenery, but ruining this scenery, we have quite a lot of unnecessary details here. So these are just distracting elements like these chimneys. What I'm going to do is removing them on a separate layer, just practicing the healing brushes and the clone stamp tool, and you will see that again combination of these tools is the best way of working. So instead of using and relying on one tool, I'm going to switch back and forth between them. So first I start with the spot healing brush. Make sure you have sample all layers selected, and then you can paint over the majority of the detail you want to remove. You can even go over this bit here. Once you let go, you will probably have most of it removed with quite good results. And only parts where you have issues like this, you would have to switch to the clone stamp tool. But before I do, I will also remove this cable here. So for this, if you use the mouse and you just click on one side and shift click on the other side, that's a quick way to removing something on a straight line. Then I just paint over these parts here again, like that. So now that we remove the cable, I can switch to the clone stamp tool, make my brush smaller, Alt click, and I Alt click intentionally on the edge and slightly further away from the detail I want to correct, so I have enough space, but also I can align it perfectly there. That's why I sample from an edge, and that's again another useful technique to remember. Try to always sample from edges or edge details. That looks very good. We can see before and after. We already removed quite a big detail from here, and then we can just keep on doing the same thing. Once again, I select the spot healing brush, paint over another chimney, and these other two chimneys I'm not really bothered about. I'm going to keep those there. Once I let go, it will replace that detail, and this is what the spot healing brush sometimes does, that randomly picks sampling point. That's why sometimes you end up having unexpected results like that car there. If I would paint over it again, it might not sample the car again, and now it samples from a nearby area, the chimney. So remember what I told you, that these sections which don't have much detail around them will work perfectly with the spot healing brush. But then when you get closer like this, it's best to switch back to the clone stamp tool, because with that you can be sure what you are sampling and also how the copied details will look like. So if I alt click somewhere, maybe here on the water, I can start painting over these parts. I can always make my brush smaller and get very accurate around these details. And I can decide to copy some green here. So sampling from the edge, then I can just paint over. So there's some trees, and making my brush smaller, I can paint over these details as well. And then if I just continue, it will automatically switch to the water, which we need, once again, because I aligned and sampled my cloning from an edge. And then we can just continue sampling from the water, paint over this detail here, go over that, and then when we zoom out, we can have a look at the overall replacement. The water texture looks slightly smudged. So what I'm going to do is switch to the healing brush, which I normally use for blending details together. Now I again sample from the water, and I nicely just go over the parts where I feel like it's obvious that there has been some changes made. And you see with this, I managed to blend it in quite nicely. Obviously, with a bit of extra work, you can always do better results.